The blockchain genesis story. The blockchain origin story, like all good origin stories, remains somewhat shrouded in mystery. In October 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto, a pseudonym for a person or persons unknown to the present day, proposed a combined digital asset, Bitcoin, and peer-to-peer payment system, the Bitcoin blockchain network, in a modest 9-page paper entitled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Against the backdrop of a global financial crisis, the genesis block of the Bitcoin network was mined on January 3, 2009, and the first block thereafter was created on January 8, 2009. Nakamoto announced the release of the Bitcoin protocol software as open source the day after the first block was mined. In this paper, the pseudonymous Nakamoto described the problem that Bitcoin was designed to solve as being one of trust. Bitcoin solved the problem of trust by introducing a mechanism for making financial transactions computationally impractical to reverse, that is, by solving the double spending problem. It achieved this by using a peer-to-peer distributed timestamp server to generate computational proof of the chronological order of transactions. The blockchain, which would be secure as long as honest nodes collectively control more CPU power than many cooperating group of attacker nodes. As such, the blockchain to which Bitcoin gave birth relied on the capabilities of two fundamental technological primitives: cryptography and distributed systems. Cryptography is a centuries-old discipline that embodies the principles, means, and methods for the transformation of data in order to hide their semantic content, prevent their unauthorized use, or prevent their undetected modification. Public key cryptography, upon which Bitcoin relies, is a type of cryptography in which there is a public key that, just as the name implies, is made public, and a corresponding private key that must always be kept secret. For encryption, the public key is used for encryption and the private key for decryption. For digital signatures, the keys' roles are reversed. A digital signature, which relies upon public key cryptography, is data that, when appended to a digital object, like a document, allows someone to verify its authenticity and integrity. In the Nakamoto paper, Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, was described as a chain of digital signatures. All this might have been quite ordinary, save for the fact that most digital signature schemes rely upon a third-party trust anchor, a certificate authority, CA, which issues digital certificates to certify who owns a public key. This allows trusting parties to rely upon signatures or on assertions made about the private key that corresponds to the certified public key. In Bitcoin, on the other hand, public and private key pairs are created without reliance upon an external CA. As a result, reliance upon traditional CAs to generate key pairs is not necessary with blockchain technology, and may even be a defense against malevolent CAs. The use of digital signatures is an important aspect of how the Bitcoin network works. To prevent forgery of digitally signed content, an input message is converted into a hash, which is comprised of a 256-bit string, produced when a hash function algorithm is applied to an input message. The input message can be of any size. For example, in theory, you could take the entirety of the Bodleian Library or the Library of Congress, if they were completely digitized, and reduce them to a 256-bit hash. For each Bitcoin transaction, the hash consists of a hash value of the concatenation of following fields: version number, transaction inputs, transaction outputs, and lock time. To improve Bitcoin's robustness, an update of the Bitcoin protocol called SegWit was introduced on August 24, 2017, in block number 481824. It includes another two fields called flag and witnesses. Once the input message is hashed, it is nearly impossible to regenerate it from the hash output. In other words, you cannot reverse the hash function to reproduce the Bodleian Library, the Library of Congress, or a Bitcoin transaction from its hash, or at least it is currently considered computationally impossible to do so. Hashing, therefore, is a one-way function, not a two-way function, as in the case of encryption and its counterpart, decryption. The fact that it's not easy to guess or reproduce the content of the original input message from its hash is helpful for maintaining integrity because the hash helps detect any changes to the input message. A change in the input message will produce a different hash output, signaling that the original message could have been tampered with. As Nakamoto noted in his paper, however, digitally signing transactions alone would not prevent someone from double spending a coin or transferring it a second time. To solve this problem, without relying on a trusted third party, additional features need to be designed into the system. Bitcoin achieved this through establishing a transparent ledger visible to all participants on the network. Transactions must be publicly announced, with a system for participants to agree on a single history of the order in which they were received. The process of establishing a shared ledger begins with each participant on the Bitcoin distributed network digitally signing transactions that propagate to other network participants across the network in a gossip-like way. The Bitcoin network, a network of indeterminate size, runs on the Transmission Control Protocol network and has a random topology, meaning that each participating node communicates randomly with other participating nodes. There is no hierarchy among the participating nodes. Each one can come and go as it pleases from the network without any permission. This is why Bitcoin is called a permissionless distributed ledger. Each participant verifies that every new transaction it receives complies with Bitcoin's rules and checks and validates the transaction, including checking for any conflicts with previous transactions. Once a transaction is verified, it enters the participant's list of provisional unconfirmed transactions, the memory pool, and is forwarded on to other participants on the network. Transactions that fail verification enter the participant's orphan pool. At this point, provisional unconfirmed transactions still need to be confirmed. Confirmation begins when the Merkle root of a tree of hashes of provisional sets of unconfirmed transactions are grouped together into blocks. Each block is limited to a megabyte, or about 1 million bytes in size. If each transaction is about 250 bytes, then each block can hold a maximum of about 4,000 transactions. However, as transaction sizes can vary significantly, this can only be considered a very rough estimate. Each block also has a header that includes, among other data, a hash of the block transaction data. That is, the Merkle root, or hash of all previous transaction hashes of the transactions to be incorporated into a specific block, a timestamp, and a hash link to the block that precedes it, in order to create an append-only, sequential chain that forms a blockchain. This assures that the correct order of transactions is recorded in the ledger and cannot be altered without detection. To create a transparent and shared ledger on which all participants can agree without resorting to reliance upon a third-party arbiter of the truth requires another novel feature of the Bitcoin network, a mechanism for achieving consensus among network participants on the validity of blocks. To achieve consensus, Bitcoin network participants can choose to work on solving a computational puzzle called proof of work that generates a block hash output that is below a certain difficulty target, typically represented as a hash beginning with the correct number of zeros when added to a nonce, a random or pseudo-random number. Puzzle solvers, called miners, must use computational CPU power to find the unknown value. It is computationally very hard to solve the puzzle, so miners are rewarded for their effort with a certain number of new coins, the block reward, in order to incentivize them to expend costly CPU power to maintain the network. Block rewards also help to keep miners honest, on the assumption that it is more profitable for them to expend CPU energy on honestly maintaining the network than subverting the source of their income generation and the basis of their wealth. Mined blocks are then propagated out to other participants across the network. Each participant is programmed to validate the blocks it receives first. Once validation is complete, participants update their copies of the ledger, at which time the transactions within the new block are considered confirmed by that participant. Once confirmed, any transactions in the participant's memory pool or orphan pool that conflict with those in the new block are then discarded. The confirmation process continues until each participant in the network completes it. As ideally configured, each network participant is under separate control and independently confirms the validity of blocks. This approach to creating a transparent and shared ledger on which all participants can agree has come to be known as Nakamoto consensus. Nakamoto consensus solved a well-known and long-standing problem in distributed computing, the Byzantine generals problem. This is a problem that was first theorized by the mathematicians Leslie Lamport, Robert Shostak, and Marshall Pease. In their paper, they explain the problem of achieving consensus among peers in an open distributed network when it is unknown which peers might be trusted. To illustrate the problem, they used the metaphor of Byzantine generals on the verge of attacking an enemy city during a siege. The generals are located in different areas surrounding the city and can only communicate via messengers in order to coordinate their attack. However, it is highly probable, or even certain, that there are traitors among the messengers, or that the messages of honest messengers have been corrupted. The problem, therefore, lies in the ability to effectively coordinate an attack when it is unknown if messages or messengers have been interfered with. Nakamoto's consensus mechanism solves the problem for Bitcoin by requiring participants to rely upon and add only to the longest chain. Chains containing confirmed updates always grow the fastest and are the longest. Since participants producing these updates have solved the POW puzzle first. This helps protect the integrity of the network, since, as explained by Nakamoto, if a majority of CPU power is controlled by honest nodes, the honest chain will grow the fastest and outpace any competing chains. To modify a passed block, an attacker would have to redo the proof of work of the block and all blocks after it, and then catch up with and surpass the work of the honest nodes. In this way, the Bitcoin network remains trustworthy, even if some network participants send incorrect or harmful information. From the original Nakamoto paper and its antecedents emerged the basic characterization of blockchains in intricate and delicate balance. A decentralized ledger, the entries of which are tamper-evident, agreed among all participants, transparent, and of pseudonymous origin. Working together, these characteristics generate arguably the most significant and controversial property of blockchains of all: immutability. Immutability in the context of blockchain and distributed ledger technology can be understood as the property wherein ledger records cannot be modified or removed once added to a distributed ledger. It would not be possible to achieve tamper evidentiality or resistance without the existence of a transparent ledger, which renders visible any alterations in original input data that might occur. Similarly, if the ledger were to be maintained by a single controlling interest, there would be nothing to prevent that controlling interest from altering ledger records if it were to choose to do so. Even if digital signing of transaction records and blocks makes alterations evident, once control of the ledger is decentralized, no single controlling interest can unilaterally alter it because a majority of participants must first agree on the alteration. In the Bitcoin network, this only becomes possible when participants who collectively control more than 50% of the CPU effort it takes to confirm blocks agree to change the ledger. The more decentralized the participants in the network, in the sense of being free from the power and control of one another, the more censorship-resistant is the ledger. That is, the more likely it is that an incomplete or altered copy of the ledger held by one of the participants would be rejected. This characteristic also contributes to immutability because it prevents a single controlling interest or consortium of interests from exercising control over the ledger in order to rewrite the ledger history. Altering or deleting records written to the ledger requires the agreement of the majority of all the participants on the network to that action, which is very difficult to gain, or the destruction of all of the hard disks of all of the participants on the network, which would be nearly impossible if participants are truly decentralized. It is precisely the difficulty of doing this that contributes to a blockchain system's immutability. Finally, pseudonymity, while protecting privacy, also serves to prevent collusion among network participants, since if participants cannot identify one another, it is more difficult for them to form cartels or fall under one another's control. Should any of these underlying properties be absent or altered, ledger immutability may be affected. For instance, so-called 51% attacks. When a Bitcoin network participant or group of participants gains more than 50% of the hashing power on the network, to form a controlling interest can lead to alterations in the ledger. In this case, those with the controlling interest will have sufficient CPU energy to modify a passed block by recomputing the POW of all blocks to catch up with and surpass the work of the honest nodes. In essence, this gives the controlling interest the power to roll back history. Given the conditionality of blockchain immutability, whether intentional or not, it is inadvisable to view it in essentialist terms as a fixed and stable blockchain property. Rather, blockchain immutability is as much socially constructed as technically implemented, and is best viewed as a sustained commitment that a group of individuals holds on to because they believe that the attribute is desirable and necessary. This commitment has been affirmed by experts from countries around the globe participating in the development of international standards on blockchain and distributed ledger technology, even though they acknowledge that immutability is a design goal of blockchain and distributed ledgers, not something that can be absolutely guaranteed. Why should so many individuals have come to see the property of immutability as desirable or necessary, despite its limitations? Nakamoto's original paper provides the answer. Trust. Copyright 2025, blockchain at UBC, all rights reserved.